Ever have one of those moments where something feels off? Not because you saw a monster or heard some impossible sound, but because every logical explanation slowly falls apart right in front of you. Tonight, I am sharing 3 true home intrusion stories that still haunt the people who lived through them. In the first story, a college student thinks the strange figure in his apartment is nothing more than a drunken hallucination, until daylight proves he was terrifyingly wrong. The second begins with an anonymous late-night phone call that somehow knows exactly what is happening inside an empty house. And the final story will make you think twice before sleeping in someone else's basement, because sometimes the thing watching you isn't a nightmare. It is already in the room. These aren't ghost stories. There are no supernatural creatures here, just ordinary people, ordinary homes, and someone who never should have been inside them. So lock your doors, turn the lights down, and let's get into tonight's stories. For as long as I could remember, all I wanted was a place I could finally call my own. Growing up wasn't exactly easy. My dad spent most weekends drunk, my mom and I never really got along, and the house always felt tense. Every conversation seemed to turn into an argument. And the older I got, the more desperate I became to leave. By the time I was in high school, moving out wasn't just a dream, it was my escape plan. Then college came around. I couldn't afford to move away for school because my parents weren't paying for it, so I enrolled at a commuter college close to home. Still, I wasn't about to spend another year living under that roof. Every single day, I refreshed Zillow, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, anything that might have a cheap apartment I could actually afford. Eventually, I found one. It wasn't anything luxurious, but the price fit my budget, so I scheduled a viewing immediately. The apartment was simple, but it had everything I needed. When you walked in, there was one large open living room and dining area. The kitchen sat just off to the side behind a dividing wall. A hallway led toward the bedroom, with 2 closets and the bathroom along the way. At the very end sat a surprisingly spacious bedroom that easily fit a queen-size bed, a couple of dressers, and a television. For a 19-year-old college student trying to build a life from scratch, it honestly felt perfect. I signed the lease almost immediately. For the next few months, life was exactly what I'd hoped it'd be. No yelling, no drunken arguments, no walking on eggshells, just peace and quiet. Then one night, after hanging out with some friends downtown, everything changed. We ran into a few girls we knew, and one of them, I'll call her Sammy, ended up coming back to my apartment. We'd known each other from school for a while, but had never really spent time together one-on-one. We shared a few drinks, watched a movie, laughed about random things, and eventually moved into the bedroom to finish the film. Nothing serious happened between us. She wanted to take things slow, and I respected that completely. Somewhere during the movie, though, the alcohol finally caught up with both of us. We passed out. I had no idea that a few hours later, I'd wake up to the most terrifying night of my life. The last thing I remembered was the movie still playing softly in the background. Then, I suddenly woke up. It was still the middle of the night, and for a second I couldn't even remember where I was. My room was almost completely dark except for the faint glow coming from somewhere in the apartment. Then, I heard it. Footsteps, not loud, not frantic, just slow, careful footsteps coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. Still half asleep, I looked over to my right. Sammy wasn't in bed anymore. I immediately sat up and looked toward the bedroom door. From where I was lying, I could see part of the living room. Sammy was there, quietly picking up her purse and jacket from the couch. She was barely making any noise. Honestly, it made sense. We'd both been drinking, and I figured she wanted to avoid that awkward morning after conversation. We'd only hung out like that once, so slipping out quietly actually seemed pretty normal. I almost called out to her, but I decided not to. Instead, I smiled to myself, rolled back over, and let her leave. A few moments later, I heard the front door open, then close. Just to make sure I wasn't imagining it, I quietly called out, "Sammy?" No answer. That confirmed what I already thought. She was gone. Within a minute or two, I drifted back to sleep. I don't know exactly how much time passed, maybe an hour, maybe less. But this time I woke up differently. Not naturally, something had startled me awake. A loud sound echoed somewhere inside the apartment. My eyes flew open. Instantly, my heart was racing. The room felt different. Too quiet, too still. I stayed frozen in bed, listening as hard as I could. "Sammy?" I called again. Nothing. No reply. No footsteps. No movement. Just silence. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. Even though I knew it sounded ridiculous, I texted Sammy anyway. "Are you still in my apartment?" The second I hit send, I realized how strange that message looked, but I didn't care. Something felt wrong, very wrong. The bedroom door was still wide open because I'd been too lazy to shut it after she left. As I stared into the darkness of the hallway, I noticed something. At first, I blamed the alcohol. I'd had several drinks earlier, and I figured my eyes just weren't adjusting. But there was something wrapped around the edge of the bedroom door frame. It was so dark I couldn't tell what I was looking at. My breathing became heavier. Every instinct told me not to move, not to blink, not to make a sound. I slowly swiped down on my iPhone, trying not to shake. My thumb hovered over the flashlight icon for one terrifying second. I questioned whether I even wanted to know what was standing there. Then I pressed it. The white beam exploded into the darkness, and instantly, I realized those weren't shadows. There were two human hands gripping both sides of my bedroom doorframe. Someone was standing just outside my room. The second the flashlight hit the doorway, everything happened at once. The fingers tightened around the frame, almost like whoever was hiding there had been caught completely off guard. For a split second, they didn't move. Then, they disappeared. Whoever was standing outside my room instantly pulled their hands back into the darkness. That was all it took. The scream I'd been holding inside exploded out of me. I started yelling without even thinking. Get out! Get out of my apartment! Over and over again, I screamed until my throat burned. My voice echoed through the apartment, but there was no response, no footsteps, no doors slamming, nothing. After several long seconds, I finally forced myself out of bed. Every instinct told me to stay where I was, but I couldn't spend the rest of the night wondering if someone was still standing outside my bedroom. I slowly stepped into the hallway. It was empty. The same hallway I'd been staring at only moments earlier now looked completely normal. I immediately flipped on the hallway light. The bright light filled the narrow corridor, and for a brief moment I felt a little safer. My heart, however, was still pounding so hard I could hear it. I took a deep breath and checked the closest hallway closet empty. I opened the pantry closet, nothing. Then the bathroom. No one. The shower curtain hung exactly where it always did. No feet beneath it. No movement, just silence. That should have made me feel better. It didn't, because if someone had really been standing outside my room, where did they go? I continued toward the living room. There weren't many hiding places. The apartment wasn't very large, which somehow made the situation even more confusing. I held my phone out in front of me as if it were a weapon, the flashlight beam shaking with every nervous step. It was ridiculous. If someone had rushed me, an iPhone wasn't going to save my life. Still, holding something felt better than holding nothing. I reached the light switch and flipped it on. The living room instantly lit up. The couch, the coffee table, the dining area. Everything looked exactly the way we'd left it earlier that night. No overturned furniture, no broken window, no stranger waiting in the shadows. Only the kitchen remained. That dark opening suddenly looked like the last place on earth I wanted to enter. I swallowed hard and slowly walked toward it. One quick reach, one click. The kitchen lights flooded the room. Again, nothing. I checked behind the couch. Under the table, inside every cabinet large enough to hide a person. Even though I knew it was irrational, I looked anyway. The apartment was empty. Completely empty. Finally, I hurried to the front door. That is when another disturbing thought hit me. I never heard the front door open. I never heard it close. If someone had entered or left, why hadn't I heard a single sound? Trying to convince myself there had to be a logical explanation, I grabbed my phone and called Sammy. After several rings, she answered. Her voice sounded sleepy and confused. Hello, hey, were you just back in my apartment? There was a long pause. What? No, she said. I left like an hour ago. I couldn't fall asleep, so I just grabbed my stuff and went home. I forced out an awkward laugh. Oh, okay, sorry. I thought I heard something. No worries, she replied before hanging up. The call should have reassured me instead. It made the apartment feel even emptier, and somehow, even more terrifying. After I hung up with Sammy, I just stood there in the middle of my apartment. Every room was brightly lit. Every closet had been checked. Every corner was empty. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been standing only a few feet away from me moments earlier. I needed someone to tell me I was overreacting, so I started calling my best friend. He didn't answer the first time, or the second. I kept calling until he finally picked up, sounding half asleep and more confused than annoyed. Dude, do you know what time it is? I apologized immediately before blurting out everything that had just happened. The footsteps, Sammy leaving, the loud noise, the hands wrapped around my bedroom door frame. The search through the apartment, all of it. He listened quietly before letting out a long sigh. Tommy, you were drinking tonight, right? Yeah. And you just woke up out of a deep sleep? Yay. I think you had one of those waking dreams, you know. Sleep paralysis or a hypnopompic hallucination, it happens. I hated to admit it, but his explanation actually made sense. I had been drinking. I was exhausted. I'd fallen asleep almost immediately after getting home. Maybe my brain really had mixed a dream with reality after all. If there had actually been someone inside my apartment, wouldn't I have heard the front door? Wouldn't I have found some sign they were there? The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself he was probably right. By the end of the conversation, I was even laughing a little. Man, I probably just scared myself. He laughed too. Told you, go get some sleep. We hung up. For the first time since waking up, I actually felt my breathing return to normal. I walked back to my bedroom, closed the door this time, locked it, and climbed back into bed. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, sunlight poured through the apartment windows, making everything feel normal again. Honestly, the whole experience already seemed less frightening in daylight. Still, something kept bothering me. I couldn't stop replaying the image of those hands. The way the fingers wrapped around both sides of the bedroom doorframe. It had looked so incredibly real. Almost against my own will, I walked down the hallway toward my bedroom door. I leaned in closer, then closer. And suddenly, every ounce of confidence disappeared. There, exactly where I'd seen those hands gripping the frame, were fingerprints. Clear, distinct. One set on each side of the doorframe. The marks lined up perfectly with where each finger had been resting only hours earlier. I froze. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I thought I might actually pass out. My friend's explanation instantly fell apart. That wasn't a dream, that wasn't alcohol. That wasn't sleep deprivation. Someone had actually been standing outside my bedroom, watching me while I slept. My hands started shaking as I grabbed my phone. Without even thinking, I took a picture of the fingerprints. Years later, that photo is still sitting in my iCloud. It is the only proof I have that what happened that night was real. I stared at the image on my phone for several seconds before realizing there was only one person I could ask for advice. Ironically, it was the last person I wanted to call, my dad. For a few minutes, I just stood there staring at those fingerprints. The apartment felt completely different now. Less than 24 hours earlier, it had been the place I dreamed of owning, a quiet escape from everything I'd grown up with. Now it felt violated. Someone had been inside. Someone had been close enough to touch my bedroom door, close enough to watch me sleeping. And somehow, they'd vanished without a trace. I kept replaying the entire night in my head, hoping I'd remember something I'd missed. Had I forgotten to lock the front door? Had someone followed Sammy and me home? Had they already been inside before we even got back? No matter how many times I thought about it, none of the possibilities made me feel any better. I finally picked up my phone and called my dad. We didn't exactly have the kind of relationship where we talked about personal things, but this felt serious enough to make the call. After listening to the story, he didn't panic. He didn't comfort me. Instead, he let out a frustrated sigh. "Did you lock your front door?" There was a long silence. "Number? You left it unlocked." "I guess so." He didn't yell, he didn't need to. "You got lucky," he said. "Be thankful nothing was stolen and nobody hurt you. Learn from it and don't ever make that mistake again." As much as I hated hearing it, he was right. His words weren't comforting, but they were true. I'd been careless, and someone had taken advantage of that. To this day, I still have no idea who entered my apartment. I don't know whether they planned to rob me. I don't know whether they were simply looking for an unlocked place to hide, and I definitely don't know why. Out of every possible thing they could have done, they chose to stand silently outside my bedroom, with both hands wrapped around the doorframe, watching me sleep. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up when I did. Would they have walked into my room? Would they have left quietly? Or were they waiting for something? Those are questions I'll never have answers to. When my one-year lease finally ended, I didn't renew it. I packed everything I owned, moved into a different apartment, and never looked back. Even now, years later, I still check every lock before I go to bed, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times, because all it takes is one forgotten lock. For a complete stranger to remind you that your home isn't always as safe as you think. Imagine you are home alone. Your parents are gone for the night. The house is completely quiet and you are lying in bed watching YouTube before calling it a night. Everything feels normal until your phone rings. No caller 499. You answer expecting a prank call or a scam. Instead, all you hear is silence and the faint sound of a television playing somewhere in the background. At first, it doesn't seem strange. Then you realize the television on the other end of the call is playing the exact same program as the one downstairs in your living room. Every word, every commercial, every sound perfectly synchronized. There is only one explanation. Whoever is calling you is inside your house. What follows is a terrifying game of patience, instinct, and survival that turns one ordinary night into something I'll never forget. Looking back now, I realize my parents' house never really felt like a normal family home, at least not in the way most people would imagine. My dad traveled constantly for work, sometimes disappearing for days at a time. My mom was almost always somewhere else too, out with friends, staying at my aunt's house, or attending some family gathering that kept her away overnight. They weren't bad parents, and I never felt abandoned. They simply lived busy lives that rarely kept them at home. Because of that, by the time I turned 16, I had practically learned how to live on my own. Most nights, I'd eat dinner by myself. I'd watch television alone. Sometimes I'd have the entire house to myself for an entire weekend. Being an only child made it even quieter. Back then, I actually loved it. To a teenager, it felt like freedom. There was nobody asking where I was going, nobody complaining if I stayed up too late, and nobody telling me to turn the volume down. I could invite friends over, play video games until 2 in the morning, or spend hours talking to girls on the phone without feeling embarrassed. It felt like having my own house, without paying a mortgage. Even after I turned 19 and started attending a nearby college, nothing really changed. If anything, my parents were gone even more often than before. That meant I knew the house better than anyone. Every staircase creak, every air vent, every pipe that knocked when the heater kicked on. If something sounded different, I'd notice. That detail matters, because this wasn't one of those creepy old houses where every little noise made you nervous. Sure, it was older, but every sound had become familiar over the years. I used to joke that the house had its own personality. Then, one Friday night, everything started out exactly as it always did. My dad was several states away on another business trip. Earlier that week, my mom had told me she was staying overnight at my aunt's house because the family was getting together early the next morning. As she grabbed her purse before leaving, she smiled and said, "It is just you tonight." I laughed. "You don't even have to tell me anymore." She smiled back, wished me good night, and drove away. I locked the front door behind her and settled into what I expected would be another completely ordinary evening. I made myself something to eat, watched television in the living room, scrolled through my phone. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. Around 11 o'clock, I finally headed upstairs to my bedroom. My room sat at the very end of the hallway. At the top of the stairs was a small landing. My parents' bedroom was immediately to the right. Then farther down the hall were the bathroom, the linen closet, and finally my room. Like always, I left my bedroom door open. My parents had always insisted on that habit. They believed keeping bedroom doors open at night made it easier to hear if someone ever broke into the house. Honestly, I had grown to like it. When I was home alone, the little sounds of the house made it feel less empty. I climbed into bed, opened YouTube on my laptop, and started watching random videos while lazily scrolling through my phone between recommendations. It was peaceful, completely ordinary. The kind of quiet night you forget almost as soon as it is over. I had absolutely no idea that before the night ended, someone else would be inside that same house with me. I must have watched YouTube for another hour before I finally shut my laptop. The room went noticeably quieter. I tossed the laptop onto my desk, rolled onto my back, and started mindlessly scrolling through my phone. It was one of those nights where you are tired enough to sleep, but somehow you keep telling yourself just 5 more minutes. Eventually, my eyes started getting heavy. That is when my phone rang. The sound nearly made me jump. I looked at the screen. No caller 499. I frowned. I'd never received a blocked call before, especially not this late at night. My first thought was that it had to be spam, so I ignored it and let it ring until it stopped. A few seconds later, it rang again. Same thing. No caller 499. Now my curiosity got the better of me. Whoever it was had called twice in a row. Maybe it was actually important. Maybe a family member was using someone else's phone, or maybe someone genuinely needed to reach me. So I answered. Hello, silence. Not complete silence, just no voice. I waited. Nothing. Hello, I repeated. A little louder this time. That is when I noticed something strange, very faintly. I could hear a television playing. At first, it barely registered. It sounded distant, almost muffled, like someone's television was on in another room. I kept listening. No breathing, no talking, just the television for a moment. I assumed the caller had accidentally pocket-dialed me. Then something clicked in my head. Earlier that evening, I'd left my own television on downstairs in the living room. I always kept it playing quietly as background noise whenever I was home alone. I could still hear it faintly from upstairs, And suddenly I realized the television on the phone sounded familiar, too familiar. I stopped moving completely. I listened to the television downstairs. Then I listened to the television coming through the phone. The dialogue matched, every word, every commercial transition perfectly. There wasn't even the slightest delay. It wasn't similar audio. It was the exact same broadcast, playing at the exact same moment. A cold chill ran straight down my spine. My stomach tightened so fast it almost hurt. There was only one explanation that made any sense. Whoever had called me was listening to my television inside my house. I tried to force myself to think logically. Maybe someone was standing outside one of the downstairs windows. Maybe the phone call was somehow picking up audio from my own microphone. Maybe there was some bizarre technical glitch. I wanted any explanation except the one my instincts were screaming. Still holding the phone to my ear, I slowly climbed out of bed. Every movement suddenly felt louder than it should. The hallway outside my room was completely dark. I walked toward my open bedroom door and listened. The television downstairs continued playing quietly. So did the television through the phone. Still perfectly synchronized. Not 1 second apart. Not even half a second. Exactly the same. That is when denial finally disappeared. Someone wasn't outside. Someone wasn't calling from across town. Someone was close enough to hear my living room television in real time. And that meant I wasn't alone anymore. I stood frozen in my bedroom doorway, the phone still pressed against my ear. Every instinct told me to slam my bedroom door shut and call the police. But another part of me kept searching for a rational explanation. Maybe one of my friends was outside messing with me. Maybe my dad had come home early and was pulling some ridiculous prank. Maybe I wanted anything to be true except the thought that someone had broken into the house. Without really thinking, I yelled down the staircase. "Who is down there?" The words echoed through the empty house. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, the call disconnected. The anonymous caller had hung up. My mouth instantly went dry. I stared at my phone screen for a second before realizing there was no number to call back. Just no caller 499. Now the silence inside the house felt overwhelming. I slowly stepped into the upstairs hallway. The staircase was only a few feet away. I looked down into the darkness below. The television was still playing in the living room exactly where I'd left it. Everything looked normal. Then, creak, a floorboard shifted downstairs. Not the normal settling sounds I'd heard 1,000 times growing up. This sounded different, heavy, like someone's weight had just transferred onto the wooden floor. I stopped breathing. Every hair on my arms stood up. I kept listening. Another second passed. Then I heard something even worse. Someone cleared their throat. It wasn't loud, just one quiet hum, but it was unmistakably human. At that moment, every comforting explanation I'd been clinging to completely disappeared. There was someone downstairs, a real person, inside my house. Without making another sound, I backed away from the staircase. Slowly, carefully, I returned to my bedroom, closed the door as quietly as I could, and immediately locked it. The click of the lock sounded painfully loud. I leaned against the door, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. I still wasn't completely ready to believe it. Maybe, just maybe, this was my dad testing me. He loved practical jokes. Maybe he'd decided to see how I'd react if someone broke into the house. It sounded ridiculous, but it was still better than believing a stranger was walking around downstairs. I called my dad. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. He was probably asleep in his hotel room. I couldn't blame him. Next, I called my Uncle T. He picked up on the second ring, sounding groggy. "Steve, what is going on? I know this is going to sound crazy." I took a deep breath. "Are you downstairs in my house?" There was a long pause, then he answered exactly the way you'd expect. "Steve, what the hell are you talking about?" I explained everything as quickly as I could. The anonymous phone call, the television, the footsteps, the throat clearing. When I finished, he let out a breath. "Honestly, that sounds exactly like something your father would do." For one brief moment, I actually felt relieved. Maybe he was right. Maybe this whole nightmare really was one of Dad's stupid pranks then. My phone vibrated again. I slowly looked at the screen. My heart almost stopped. "No caller 499, they were calling back." I whispered into the phone. "Uncle, stay on the line. I'll put you on hold. Don't hang up." He immediately replied, "I am not going anywhere." With trembling fingers, I answered the second call. And somehow, what happened next was even more terrifying than the first. I took one slow breath before answering the second call. "Hello." Once again, silence. No voice, no breathing. Nothing. But this time, there was no television playing in the background. Instead, I heard footsteps. Slow, measured, heavy footsteps. At first, they seemed distant. Then they grew louder, closer. Every step coming through the phone matched footsteps I was now hearing somewhere outside my bedroom. I froze. The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. Whoever was holding that phone was moving through my house, and they were heading upstairs. I held my breath and listened. Step, step, step. The sound echoed from both the hallway outside my room and the speaker pressed against my ear. They were perfectly synchronized. There was no delay, no doubt. The caller and the person walking through my house were one and the same. I remember silently praying, please let this be my dad, please let this be some stupid joke, but deep down, I already knew it wasn't. The footsteps stopped, right outside my bedroom door. The silence that followed felt endless. Then, my doorknob slowly turned. It wasn't violent. Whoever was outside wasn't trying to kick the door in. Instead, they tested it. Almost gently, the knob twisted, stopped, twisted again. Then the door gave a slight push against the lock. My heart felt like it was going to burst through my chest. Thank God my bedroom door was old and solid. The heavy lock held. I didn't dare make a sound. I just stared at the door, gripping my phone so tightly my hands started cramping. Then 3 slow knocks, knock, knock, knock. Each one calm, deliberate, almost polite. Somehow that made it even worse. If they'd been pounding on the door, I could have convinced myself they were desperate. But these knocks felt patient. Like whoever was outside knew I was only a few feet away and wanted me to know they were there. A thought suddenly flashed through my mind. Uncle T, he was still on the other call. Without wasting another second, I merged both calls together. The moment the lines connected, I shouted, "Uncle, it is not my dad. Simone's in the house. They're outside my bedroom right now." My voice cracked as I yelled, "They're on the phone with us." For a split second, nobody spoke. Then my uncle exploded. His sleepy voice was gone. He was fully awake now. "I am coming," he shouted. "You hear me, you piece of garbage? I am on my way." The anonymous caller didn't say a single word. Instead, the line disconnected. At almost the exact same moment, I heard footsteps outside my bedroom moving away. Fast. Whoever had been standing at my door was leaving. My uncle came back on the line immediately. "Stay where you are. Do not open that door." "I am driving over right now. I'll be there in a few minutes." He lived in the same town. Normally, 7 minutes wasn't a long drive. That night, it felt longer than anything I'd ever experienced. Every tiny sound inside the house made me flinch. Every second stretched into what felt like an hour. And all I could think was, what if they hadn't actually left? What if they were still somewhere inside the house, waiting? Those next few minutes felt endless. I stayed exactly where my uncle told me to stay. Sitting on the floor with my back against the bedroom door, I barely breathed. Every tiny sound made my heart race. The house had gone completely quiet again, and somehow that silence felt more frightening than the footsteps. Then, I finally heard it. A familiar voice shouting from downstairs. "Steve." It was my uncle. Relief hit me so hard my legs almost gave out. I unlocked my bedroom door and rushed into the hallway. By the time I reached the stairs, my uncle was already inside the house, yelling for anyone still hiding there to come out. Seeing another person instantly made me feel safer. Together, we started checking the house. The television was still on in the living room, playing the same late-night program I'd left on hours earlier. Every room looked untouched, no broken furniture, no obvious signs of a struggle. Then we reached the kitchen. That is where we found it. One of the kitchen windows was wide open, wide enough for someone to crawl through. Neither my uncle nor I had opened it. That meant whoever had been inside my house almost certainly used that window to get in, and most likely to get out. My uncle immediately relayed everything to the 911 dispatcher while we waited for the police. When the officers arrived, they carefully searched every room from top to bottom. We followed behind them as they cleared the house. But whoever had been inside was already gone. They asked me to explain everything from the beginning. The anonymous phone calls, the synchronized television, the footsteps, the doorknob, the knocking, every detail. Then one officer asked to see my phone. I showed him the recent calls, even though both incoming calls only displayed no caller 499. The officer explained that investigators could sometimes obtain records from the phone company and determine where a blocked call had originated. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was worth trying. That night, my uncle refused to leave me alone. He stayed over, and neither of us slept much. Every light in the house stayed on until morning. A few days later, I got a phone call from one of the officers. They had managed to trace the anonymous call. When he told me the name connected to it, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It belonged to someone I knew. Not a close friend, not an enemy, just an old acquaintance from high school. Someone who had my phone number, someone who knew where I lived. The police asked if I'd be willing to accompany them while they questioned him. My uncle came with me. When we arrived at the house, the young man's father answered the door. The moment he saw two police officers standing outside, he immediately called his son downstairs. As soon as the guy appeared, I noticed something. He looked nervous. Really nervous. The officer got straight to the point. "Did you make these anonymous phone calls?" Without hesitating, he shook his head. "Number?" Then he offered an explanation. "My phone was stolen a few days ago." He claimed he'd lost it at a party and never got it back. The officer frowned. "If it was stolen, why didn't you report it?" The guy simply shrugged. "I was just going to buy a new one." The conversation ended almost as quickly as it began. There was no confession, no arrest, no dramatic ending. We left with more questions than answers. On the drive home, I couldn't stop replaying that meeting in my head. Was the fear on his face guilt? Or was it exactly how anyone would react after opening their front door to find police officers waiting outside? I'll probably never know, because if he was telling the truth, if his phone really had been stolen, then someone else had used it to call me while hiding inside my parents' house. And somehow, that possibility is even more terrifying. It means I wasn't targeted by someone I knew. I was targeted by someone I'd never even met. Someone who slipped into an occupied home, called me from inside the house, walked all the way upstairs to my bedroom, and stood outside my locked door. Listening to this day, whenever I receive a blocked call late at night, I still hesitate before answering, because sometimes the most terrifying voice on the other end isn't a voice at all. Most break-ins happen when nobody's home, at least. That is what we're told. But what if the intruder doesn't run the moment someone walks in? What if they decide to stay? Tonight's final story begins after a completely normal night out with friends. A few drinks, a couple of bars, an Uber ride home, and crashing on a friend's basement couch. Nothing unusual. Until sometime around 3 in the morning, a thirsty, half-awake glance across a dark basement reveals something that definitely wasn't there before. At first, it looks like a pile of coats. Then it moves. Standing silently in the corner is a person. No words, no footsteps. Just someone watching. What happened over the next few minutes is something I still replay in my head whenever I walk into a dark room. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't finding out someone broke into the house. It is realizing they were already standing there, waiting for you to notice them. This happened a few years after college. By then, all of us were in our early 20s, old enough to have full-time jobs, but still young enough to spend every weekend pretending we didn't have responsibilities waiting for us on Monday morning. There were 4 of us who almost always went out together: Cody, Randy, Jake, and me. Whenever we made plans, we'd usually meet at Cody's house first. His place was perfect for it. His parents were incredibly laid back, and the basement had basically become our unofficial headquarters. It was far enough away from the rest of the house that we could laugh, play music, and have a few drinks without worrying about bothering anyone upstairs. It had become a tradition. We'd meet there, have a few drinks, call an Uber, hit a couple of local bars, then see where the night took us. That particular weekend followed the exact same routine. By the time everyone arrived at Cody's house, the mood was already good. We joked around while deciding who was responsible enough to order the Uber once it arrived. We headed out. The night was exactly what you'd expect. We bounced between a few dive bars, grabbed more drinks than we probably should have, and eventually ended up at one of those loud dance bars where everyone thinks they're a better dancer than they actually are. Hours disappeared. By the time we finally checked our phones, it was already well into the early morning. That is when Cody and I decided we'd had enough. Randy and Jake wanted to stay out longer. We didn't. So Cody called another Uber, and we headed back to his house. Since I'd been drinking, he immediately offered me the pull-out couch in the basement instead of trying to drive home. It wasn't the first time I'd slept there. Honestly, I liked crashing at Cody's place. When we got back, neither of us was ready to sleep just yet. We went downstairs, unfolded the couch, and somehow convinced ourselves we still had enough energy for one game of Madden. That turned out to be a terrible idea. Cody absolutely destroyed me. I don't think I scored once. After the game ended, I laughed, admitted defeat, and told him I was done. "I am tapping out," I said. "I am too tired for another beating." He laughed, wished me good night, and headed upstairs. A few seconds later, I heard the basement door close. Now I was alone. The basement became almost completely dark. Only a few tiny lights remained. The digital clock on the cable box cast a faint blue glow beneath the television. The television itself had a tiny standby light. Across the room, a green light from Cody's little Heineken mini fridge barely illuminated one corner of the basement. The refrigerator quietly hummed in the background. Oddly enough, that soft humming always relaxed me. Combined with the alcohol, it didn't take long before my eyes closed. Within minutes, I was completely asleep. I had no idea that I wasn't the only person in that basement. I don't know how long I'd been asleep, maybe a couple of hours, maybe less, but I suddenly woke up without really knowing why. The basement was still dark. Not the kind of darkness where you can't see anything at all, but just enough light leaked in from the cable box and that little green glow from the mini fridge to make out the rough shapes of the room. I glanced at my phone. I didn't even bother checking the time. Judging by how dark it still was, I figured it had to be somewhere around 3 or 4 in the morning. My mouth felt awful, completely dry. It was one of those hangovers where your tongue practically sticks to the roof of your mouth. I immediately regretted not bringing a bottle of water downstairs before going to bed. I considered just trying to fall back asleep. Anyone who has ever gone to bed after drinking knows that feeling you desperately want water, but you don't want to leave the warmth of the bed. I rolled onto my side and looked toward the Heineken mini fridge. For one hopeful second, I wondered if Cody had bottled water in there. Then I remembered. It only held beer. I sighed and started thinking about forcing myself upstairs to the kitchen. That is when something caught my eye. In the far corner of the basement, there was a dark shape. At first, I barely paid attention to it. The room was full of shadows. I assumed it was a pile of boxes, or maybe a jacket hanging over a chair. I blinked a couple of times, trying to let my eyes adjust. The shape didn't become any clearer. Instead, it seemed to get larger. I kept staring. The longer I looked, the less it resembled furniture. A strange feeling settled into my stomach. Something wasn't right. I knew this basement. I'd slept down here before. I knew where every chair, every shelf, and every storage bin was supposed to be. There wasn't supposed to be anything standing in that corner. Then the shape moved. Not much, just enough. A slight shift of weight. A tiny movement that no piece of furniture could ever make. My heart stopped. That wasn't a shadow. That wasn't a coat rack. There was a person standing in the corner of the basement, completely still, watching me. For a moment, I honestly questioned whether I was still dreaming. The alcohol, the darkness, my sleepy eyes. Surely my brain had to be playing tricks on me, so I kept staring, hoping, begging, for the figure to become something ordinary. But instead, I slowly made out the outline of a head, broad shoulders, long arms hanging at its sides. The figure was unusually tall. Definitely taller than Cody, and it never looked away. I can't even describe the fear that hit me. Every instinct screamed at me to jump up and run. But another instinct stopped me. If I suddenly reacted, then whoever was standing there would know I'd seen them, and I had absolutely no idea what they'd do next. So somehow, I forced myself to stay calm. I slowly sat up, stretched my arms above my head like I'd just woken up naturally, even fake yawned. Then, trying to sound as casual as possible, I quietly muttered to myself, "Man, I should have brought some water downstairs." I wasn't talking because I was thirsty anymore. I was talking because I wanted the person in the corner to believe I hadn't noticed them at all. It was the only plan I could think of, and now I had to walk past them to reach the stairs. I took one slow step, then another. I kept my breathing steady, pretending I was still half asleep. Every instinct was screaming at me to sprint for the stairs, but I knew that if the person in the corner realized I'd seen them, I might never make it out of that basement. So I stayed in character. I stretched again, rubbed my eyes, even muttered under my breath about how badly I needed a glass of water, anything to make myself look completely unaware. With each step, I moved closer to the staircase, and closer to the figure. I refused to look directly at them. Instead, I kept my eyes focused toward the stairs, using my peripheral vision to keep track of where they were. They still hadn't moved. That somehow made everything even more unsettling. Finally, I reached the bottom step. I placed one foot on it, then another. I started climbing slowly, no sudden movements, no panic, just a guy getting up for a drink of water. I was halfway up the staircase when curiosity got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I glanced back. I wish I hadn't. The figure was no longer standing in the corner. It had moved now. It was standing at the bottom of the stairs. Closer than before, close enough that I could clearly tell it was a person. For one terrifying second, we simply stared at each other. That was enough. Every ounce of self-control disappeared. I bolted. I sprinted up the remaining stairs as fast as I could, nearly tripping over my own feet. The moment I reached the top, I grabbed the basement door and slammed it shut with all my strength. Then I ran. I flew upstairs toward Cody's bedroom, pounding on the door until he woke up. "Cody, wake up. There is someone in the basement?" He shot upright, completely confused. "What?" "Someone's downstairs." "I am serious." Before he could even ask another question, a loud slam echoed from below. The basement door, my blood ran cold. "See," I yelled. That was all it took. Cody jumped out of bed, and together we rushed to wake his dad. The second we told him there was someone in the basement, he didn't hesitate. He was out of bed instantly. Without asking a dozen questions or assuming we'd imagined it, he ran downstairs toward the basement while shouting for Cody to call 911. When we reached the basement entrance, the door I'd slammed shut was standing wide open. I stared at it in disbelief. "I closed that." "I know I closed it," no one argued. Because something else immediately caught our attention. The back door of the house was open, wide open. Whoever had been hiding in the basement had escaped. While Cody stayed on the phone with the 911 operator, the three of us searched the basement, then the backyard, then the front yard, calling out and looking behind fences, bushes, and neighboring houses. But there was no sign of anyone. About 15 minutes later, police officers arrived and conducted a full search of the property. They checked every room, every storage area, every corner of the basement. Nothing. The intruder was gone. Eventually, neighbors began stepping outside, asking if everything was okay after seeing police cars lining the street. By then, any trace of alcohol had completely left my system. I wasn't tired anymore. I wasn't hungover anymore. I was just terrified. When the officers finished taking statements and left, Cody offered to drive me home. Normally, I would have accepted. Instead, I ordered an Uber. I needed to leave. As much as I cared about my friends, there was no chance I was spending another minute in that basement. For weeks afterward, every time we met at Cody's house, I caught myself looking toward that same corner. The corner where I'd first seen what I thought was a shadow. What I hoped was a trick of the light, but wasn't to this day. I still don't know who that person was. I don't know how long they'd been hiding in that basement before I woke up, and I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't gotten thirsty that night. Sometimes people ask me what the scariest part was. It wasn't running upstairs, it wasn't calling the police. It wasn't even knowing a stranger had broken into the house. The scariest part was realizing that when I first opened my eyes, they were already standing there, watching, waiting, completely silent. And if I had simply rolled over and gone back to sleep, I may never have known they were there at all.